Welcome to another edition of Business Talk with me, Michael Avery, exclusively on Business Tech, the country's largest business news website. And I've got to thank you for logging in because the show has now garnered over 100,000 unique views in its first month. So clearly you are liking the guests, you're loving what they have to say and the reflections and the insights into what has been a very difficult year. This week's guest is certainly a fan of logging in. I'm sure he would consider himself a techno-optimist. Other than being an ownophile and one of South Africa's best known and respected business leaders, innovators, venture, not vulture capitalist and angel investor, Michael Jordaan, welcome to the show.
Michael, it's such a pleasure to be talking to you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Michael, if you look where we are, November going into December, where does one start at a time like this? After the year that we've had, and as so many South Africans start winding down, I think many entrepreneurs are still going. They're still trying to make up for the lost time this year. And I think we're all feeling a little emotionally and perhaps mentally exhausted by the pandemic, the uncertainty, the fear around the virus, but also the economic uncertainty. How has it impacted you personally as you reflect?
You know, it's been a terrible year overall for humanity. It's a year where terror kind of dominated everything. And we were all severely disrupted in the way that we live and we work, etc. There's hope, of course, because of science. We are responding very fast in terms of vaccines that are being made available. And there are some positives, believe it or not, in the sense that we've drawn the future closer. Many things that wouldn't have happened before, whether it's a board meeting that's online, or education that's done online, or shopping that is delivered to your house, or basically just where people had to change their assumptions about how business could be done. That you could argue has just made the future come to us faster. So you asked me how I'm coping. I'm exposed to about 25 separate startup businesses. Those that had their business model predicated on the future have actually done well. Whether it's a business that produces electronic textbooks for learners in South Africa or one that provides data, those have actually done exceptionally well. But as you said, I love my wine as well. I live on a wine farm, which is all about return on ego. And those things have been hit really hard by some of the silly decisions that government made that during lockdown, one can't enjoy wine. So there are pros and cons, but as an entrepreneur, I always like to think of problems as potential business opportunities. And I think with the right entrepreneurial approach, we will in the end emerge stronger out of this pandemic.
And that is the entrepreneur in you, always looking for the opportunity in the challenge. As we look ahead to a kind of post-COVID-19 global economy and a South African economy located within that, what do you see as some of the dominant challenges that businesses are likely to face in the next few years that could be great business opportunities for entrepreneurs out there looking to solve these problems?
The basic thing here is that nothing is preordained. We as a country can decide that we want to grow at, let's say, 5% a year. And if we're willing to take the right hard decisions, we can grow at 5% a year. The same goes for businesses and the same goes for individuals. You decide what it is you want to do. Do you want to stay in the same career? Do you want to work for the same company? Do you want to start something new? So I do remain optimistic about the fact that we can take these decisions. The initiative is always left to us. So much depends on whether we're going to take those decisions. Right now, I'm a little bit pessimistic about government taking on a lot of debt and not doing the reforms that they should be implementing as seriously as they should. For example, I look at SAA. I feel very strongly that this is something where the privileged benefit from having an airline. And if we can't take the tough decision to close it down and or to privatize it, let the private sector take open, then I wonder whether we're going to have the ability to take much tougher decisions about state wages or maybe privatizing other state-owned enterprises. So it's all up to decisions. But you asked me about the opportunities. I think it's very, very exciting. Data growth is continuing at 60% a year. New businesses will be built on that, whether it's Internet of Things, different forms of online education will happen. There's a whole school now that shows that renewable energy is much cheaper than burning coal. So it's not just about the fact that it's green, it's actually cheaper. So the cost of energy is going to come down if we liberate that sector and let it come to the party. There's a whole host of new agricultural innovations that are coming, things that can be grown far more efficiently than the old way of doing it. Education, the barriers have been flattened all over the world. You don't have to be educated by the teacher in your school. You can get the best educator with the best content available anywhere in the world. So the borders are flattening. South Africans have access to nearly everything across the world, much of it free, by the way. This isn't just for the rich and for the privileged. So if we are open to those opportunities and we make the right proactive decisions, there's still a very exciting world out there.
And many of your startups, as you've referenced, operate in that space. I had the great pleasure of chatting to the founder of Snaplify on my show the other day. He was on a panel with Data Profit, and they do fantastic things in artificial intelligence. We've got a lot of talent in South Africa, a lot of entrepreneurial talent in South Africa. And I recall a tweet by Derek Hanekom in response to Elon Musk becoming the world's second richest man, saying, come on, Elon, you've got to come and invest in South Africa, your land of birth. And with all due respect, the minister was taken apart on Twitter because the environment hasn't been created to foster that entrepreneurial drive to innovate, to want to invest in South Africa. The return on capital is just not there. What would you like to see to give you comfort that the government is starting to realize it needs to create this conducive environment? And you've mentioned the tough decisions on the wage bill. There are many other reforms that are sort of happening piecemeal. Spectrum, energy, we've got bid window 5, but there just doesn't seem to be the requisite urgency. What is the big one for you, Michael?
Look, we have to realize that the South African economy is less than 1% of the world. And in that sense, we're not special. We are competing in the world to attract capital. We're competing in the world to attract skills. And it's a big game out there. So if you attract capital, you really have to look at your tax regime. I just don't think we are at a place where we can raise taxes anymore. I think that would be counterproductive. You would probably even raise less revenue if you put tax rates up. So I'd like to see lower tax rates. I'd like to see less bureaucracy, less government debt, because that debt is crowding out the private sector. But probably the thing that we need most of all is confidence. Confidence is the cheapest booster of economic growth. And that type of confidence will come when we properly pursue those people that have been stealing from us and that are corrupt. And I'm not just talking in government. Clearly, we know who they are. I think the same applies to the people who perpetrated the Steinhoff travesty, what happened there. We've got to be really, really tough on people who abuse the system so that confidence can be restored for the good South Africans, which are by far the majority of South Africa. So we need confidence. And then, of course, I'm in the small business sector, like venture capital. I think there's a lot that we can do to help small businesses, because after all, they're the guys that are creating the jobs, and unemployment is our biggest issue. And how you do that, I can think of one very simple thing is pay them on time, pay them within 30 days. These guys all struggle with cash flow. That would make a big difference. I would also change investment mandates. Section 28 prevents many investments in private equity and in venture capital. That's an easy win to let the asset managers also invest more in businesses, again, where capital is an issue. I'm in touch with many, many entrepreneurs. This is what I do now. And they're there and they have answers to the solutions and they can scale. So just give them a little bit of support, pay them on time, allow more people to invest in them. And I see a very thriving economy that's possible.
And you did, it reminds me of something you tweeted the other day, that too few prospective entrepreneurs actually understand the crucial concept called minimum viable product. Just explain what you meant by that, because we know MVPs are thrown around in the jargon. What's the difference between that, perhaps in a proof of concept versus a prototype, and locating that in the South African concept? Why don't local entrepreneurs really understand the concept of an MVP?
Look, Michael, I think in fairness, I didn't know about an MVP when I ran a big business. The way a big business tends to do these things is very, very differently. You throw a lot of capital at a problem or a project. Some of the best people, you have long timelines. But the exact opposite is necessary in the startup world. And the concept of a minimum viable product really comes from Silicon Valley. It basically says if you have a product or a solution to some problem out there, don't wait too long. Get out in the market as soon as possible as at low a cost as possible, but start seeing if the market likes it, if there's traction in the market. And then give yourself time and hopefully the ability to then attract the funds to improve it over time. But rather than spending, I don't know, 24 months in a laboratory and then coming out with a product and only then seeing what the market thinks, why don't you try and do it in 24 hours or 30 days or 90 days and then get the type of feedback? As a funder of potential enterprises, I can tell you that it's very difficult to fund just on the basis of an idea. There are many, many great ideas out there, but you don't know which of them are going to get traction in the market. So get out there with a minimum version of that idea and start seeing if customers are willing to pay for it. That's the way to go. Sometimes it'll fail, but then you haven't lost a lot of money. More often than not, you'll get the right type of feedback that will allow you to iterate on that MVP and grow it into a big business.
And I think a fantastic insight for potential entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who are looking for potential funding from venture capitalists and angel investors such as yourself, Michael, as to what they need to do. It's not just a spreadsheet, it's not just a business plan, it's having that minimum viable product that you can demonstrate some sort of traction in the market with. Now, one of your startups that really is doing fantastically well at the moment is Rain. And let data reign at a time when we're all locked down because of the coronavirus. It's no surprise that you must be growing at 4 or 5 times multiples. How are you managing to scale at that pace and at that rate? Were you expecting this? And are there any lessons that you can share through this period from Rain?
So, Michael, I think importantly, I need to say I back great people and great teams, as it is in this case. So I'm not involved directly, but I'm very happy with guys like Willem and Brandon and the team that are doing it. When lockdown happened, they realized they had to help South Africa, and they launched a product, the unlimited data product, that you could argue was an MVP in itself. Everything was set up, the support structures, the servers, etc. But it wasn't the type of time where you could wait. So they launched it. Sales volumes went up nearly 4 times. Which showed that South Africans still need data, they need affordable data, and they need unlimited data. And then what the business just does, it has to then, on the back of that incredible growth, they put up all the systems in place to make sure that you can handle it. So in the past couple of months, I know that they've been employing at least 100 new people per month, mostly just to support the incredible growth that they've had. It was a very exciting story. It's a little startup in a space that's dominated by the older telcos. But it shows that if you come up with a completely new product, in this case it's unlimited data, and you sell it in a different way, which is completely directly to keep costs low, that there is demand for something like that.
It's doing so well that it's got a lot of your competitors moaning about roaming agreements and other silly things when they do exactly the same thing. No names, no Pactual on the show. When we look at how COVID has impacted the overall thematic of technology. And I was chatting to Keert van Zyl of Knife Capital about this the other day. And he said the one positive is that it's almost de-risked the business case in essence. Would you go along with that? Do you think that we might see a potential golden age of VC-backed tech startups on the back of COVID-19?
I live in that world, the tech-enabled startup. It allows you to do different business models. I've just given you the Rain example. So I do think there's something about tough times that brings out the best in us. And the entrepreneurs who are willing to launch during these tough times, they are showing a certain resilience. And resilience is exactly what you're looking for when you're looking for a team to back. And if you go back in history, you'll see that many of the big companies and the big brands today were actually born in tough times. And sometimes, the founders themselves came from tough circumstances. They did it in garages and they did it with a minimum amount of capital. So I would go along with what Keert's saying is the things that look small now, small little businesses, because they only have 2 or 3 or 8 entrepreneurs or a team in them, they may be the big heroes in the future. But there's a message in that too, I think, for the big corporates. You can't think that your existing business model is always going to be the right one for the times. And you often have to think, what would you do with your big business if you could start it with a blank sheet of paper? And quite often you would change the systems, you change the people, you change the pricing, you change the target market, etc. So there's a big message for how corporates should also behave because of all these changes, particularly in technology.
Absolutely. Starting with first principles, which is pretty much what the team at Bank Zero have done. How is the development going at Bank Zero?
Look, on the one hand, very well, and we're very, very excited about what we're going to launch. On the other hand, frustrating that we're not in the market yet. We'd love to have been in the market during the lockdown period. I mean, an electronic bank like that is made for the lockdown period. Basically, the decision that was taken there was not to buy software. It's easy these days to just buy banking software off the shelf and in the cloud. But the disadvantage there is that you can't innovate as much. You're buying a set piece of software, and then you still have to enhance and adapt it for local circumstances like payment rails or local regulation, etc. So the small team there has built the entire tech stack end to end using open source technology, which is also less expensive, but sets it up for huge innovation and functionality in the future. They've also recently released their pricing list, and you may have seen that it's zero, not just for monthly fees and annual fees. I mean, obviously that's zero, but it's zero for electronic fund transfers, for debit orders, for card swipes. So we really hope to revolutionize banking in the sense it will make it far more affordable for individuals, but maybe more importantly for businesses. If we can bring big savings to businesses, that makes them more efficient, more likely to not only survive, but to invest money in things that make South Africa grow. So there's a real social drive there as well in making banking free in South Africa.
I just want to zoom out and maybe have a bit more of a philosophical conversation around this moment in our history. And if you read historian Yuval Harari, I mean, he of Homo Deus and 21 Lessons, I mean, he's really well known for being something of a techno-realist, or some might even say a techno-pessimist. And he reckons that the future of work is really going to be disrupted as a species, unlike anything we've ever seen. The loom is often cited as this big disruption, and you know, those people who were working on the loom then became loom engineers. He says what's going to happen with AI effectively is because of the network effects of AI and machines, we are in effect making millions of people redundant. And he's got quite a pessimistic view of the future of work. What's your view of the future of work and its potential impact then, to bring it back down to South Africa?
Once again, I think it's quite useful to have a macro or meta view on all of this and look back at what's happened in history. And throughout time, as we've injected new technology into the world, people have been fearful. And in a way that's completely acceptable and understandable. If you are an agricultural worker and somebody invents a tractor, that's going to threaten you, and you're not immediately going to be able to envisage new jobs that will suddenly develop because of technology. You didn't know there's going to be a computer operator or a typist or a hairdresser or a graphic designer or an architect. So those things always happen. Over time, technology has always made us not only more productive, but it's actually on a net basis created more jobs. I'm not saying that doesn't come with a whole lot of disruption and a whole lot of a need for reskilling, but technology has been creating more jobs. So that's my first statement of fact, in fact, how it's working this. The second one is that we may end up in a society where we no longer want to work 40-hour work weeks. So it could be that we just decide we're going to use all of this technology to work less and actually enjoy life more. Now remember, this could be possible because what a lot of the technology does, it also makes things cheaper. It's not only Google that's free and Twitter that's free and Facebook that's free, but there are a whole lot of AI applications that also are free. So we may need a lot less to live in the future. So I remain positive that if we can change, and that change is what I actually mean is we can retool ourselves, we can re-educate ourselves, that there's still a very good future, even though technology changes things so drastically. But education is absolutely key. You can no longer study, however long you study, and assume that you will be educated for the rest of your life. You have to grasp lifelong education. Educate yourself all the time. It could be through reading these great books that you mentioned, it could be through short courses, but lifelong education is the way to remain relevant.
Speaking of education, and obviously this time of crisis, and in the spirit of not letting a good crisis go to waste, there's a generation who are graduating shortly. What is your message to them to be graduating into this kind of economy where companies are just cutting back? They're not even thinking about employing graduates fresh out of university.
Because I think clearly the sad thing about that is even though you want to pursue an entrepreneurial career, it's not a bad idea to go and work for somebody for a year or two or three, basically just to learn how the working environment works. It's much tougher to jump from, let's say, academia straight into being your own entrepreneur. And you're quite right that it's tough out there. So if you are privileged enough, I would still encourage people to just try and travel. I think travel broadens the mind and you see new opportunities. That's great. I would also say educate yourself further. I mean, you may have a degree in engineering or a BCom of science, but why don't you learn another language? Again, these things are available for free online, or any other course. Make yourself more employable for the future. And thirdly, do consider an entrepreneurial career. Even though the odds are stacked against you, if you can find some type of problem in your vicinity that irritates you and you can see a solution to that, that maybe somebody will pay for, well, maybe now is the best time to do something like that, given the lack of other alternatives.
And it comes back to the conversation we were having earlier about big business as well, perhaps also changing the way it recruits and perhaps not just looking at a degree from an official university. If you've got a degree qualification from a Khan Academy or a Udemy, for example, I as an employer would be quite keen to employ someone who is a self-starter who potentially got a qualification for free online versus someone who went the traditional route in this environment. But as we end off, and I'd like to pick your brain a little on how you consume information. You mentioned, read good books. What are you reading at the moment, just by way of example?
Gee, I've just found a book by Naval Ravikant. I've discovered him through Twitter, and he's a venture capitalist, but he's really so clever at philosophy. So, I'm enjoying what Naval is writing. I've got a book, I've actually got it right in front of me that somebody recommended, The Beginning of Infinity. So David Deutsch, I heard that that's very good. You're actually capturing me with all my books here, The Lessons of History, 5,000 years of history. I think that gives you really a great sense so that you don't overemphasize the present. And then anyone who wants to learn more about actually wealth and happiness, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. These are all books that I enjoy. But generally, you ask, how do you deal with all the information? I actually try and minimize. I have disciplined myself to not read daily newspapers. I find that both the headlines there, they just want to capture your attention. Often they're quite negative and they make you more negative. So what I try and do is I read more weeklies. I love, for example, when The Economist appears, or let's say the Financial Mail, or any type of weekly is less about that headline grabbing, getting your immediate attention. It's a little bit more reflective. So that's quite important. And then reading. I think people who don't read are more or less the same level as people who can't read. So it's very, very important to feed your mind with the right type of input. And then just read widely, and particularly also read things that you don't necessarily agree with. Yes. So you can test yourself and you're able to change your mind.
Yeah, there could be nothing worse than walking around your whole life and just having your own biases confirmed. You've got to keep on challenging yourself. And Michael Jordaan, that's what you do every day on Twitter. So keep on tweeting. You do challenge us to think, you challenge convention, and you certainly inspire an entire generation out there of future entrepreneurs and future Michael Jordaans, hopefully, that are going to follow in your footsteps and generate great ideas and invest in amazing South African businesses. Thanks for your time. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy a well-earned break at the end of what has been a tough year.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you, and thanks for listening.